Good day, everybody. It is Calxiyn here, and if you guys enjoyed this video, you should subscribe for more RWBY videos, and this video was brought to you by my patrons and my YouTube membership members, so thanks to them for their support. Today, we will be looking at the story of seasons, which obviously we have heard before. We have heard this one told in the show, and this analysis is going to be more looking at the differences and the expansion of what we already know compared to, comparing it to other real-life fairy tales like some of the other ones have been. But make sure that you guys comment down below with your thoughts, because there are some interesting expansions going on here for sure, and I'm really excited about how it sort of expands Ozpin's character a little bit and the journey that he went through too, which is something that we don't see in the story of seasons, and I think that that is just because, you know, they didn't want to give so much away about Ozpin yet, but now that we know the truth about Ozpin, they could expand it more in the fairy tale book. There are some immediate similarities between this story and the one told in the world of Remnant. They both start with deep in the forests of Remnant, beside a great and powerful river, there lived an old wizard, and though in the world of Remnant they say mighty instead of powerful or whatever, it's all pretty much the same. And then in the world of Remnant they go on to say that he is hidden from the dangers and distractions of the world. However, in this story we do have a different explanation, and again, I think it is just because we know the truth about Ozpin, they were able to sort of put the real version for us, I guess you could say. And it says that he was blessed with magic, but cursed with a long, lonely life. And obviously, long is a little ironic because we know that for Ozpin, long is long, you know what I mean? It's not just long, it is long, it is immortal, it is literally immortality, right? And then he closed himself to everyone and everything in the world, and personally what I imagine this as is that he is living a long and lonely life because of what happened with Salem. That this is I don't want to say right after, but this is sometime, you know, this is sometime in the timeline after what happened with Salem. I would personally say that this is after the drunkard life, if that makes sense, the one where he's drinking away and trying to forget all his problems and all that stuff. I think that this is right before he sort of gets back into it with the inventor life where he makes the cane, and then the inquisitor, the one that finds the relic and all that stuff. So personally, I think that the hermit sort of falls into that category because of what we see in the fairy tale, that this is sort of him still enclosing himself and not sort of doing what he's supposed to do, and that is fighting against Salem. What happened with Salem is still sort of raw here, and it says his heart was so cold that everything was covered in snow. And since the seasons change, I wonder if this is supposed to happen in some place like Vale, just because we can assume that Atlas never gets warm enough for snow to melt, and we know that Vale does have snow. I don't know if that's going to be important, but I do wonder, the thing that it doesn't really answer is, in what capacity this was true. Did 4 girls really visit him in the middle of nowhere? I doubt it, and so I wonder, I don't know. I wonder, and we'll see, because the girls do teach him valuable lessons, and so are these lessons just a manifestation of, what Ozpin, did as the hermit and eventually learned himself, or did somebody actually teach these things to him, right? And, a lot of people think that he made the maiden powers, you know, as a sort of, memory of his lost daughters and all that sort of stuff, and that the maidens aren't actually, real in the sense that anyone actually visited him, but they are supposed to be representations of each daughter he lost. Maybe the personalities of, the daughters and what he imagined they would grow up in. I don't know, some weird psychological things, because, for example, Winter is meditating under a tree, and it's well, did Ozpin just teach himself meditation, or, you know, did one of his children, really like to meditate, and so, you know what I mean, or did a random girl actually go to see him? We still don't really know. So in the world of Remnant, when it comes to Winter meditating under the tree, the wizard, he's I demand an explanation. What are you doing here, apparently? And that makes him seem a bit crabby, you know what I mean? But in this story, he's actually concerned. In the fairy tale, he's actually concerned if she's, frozen to death and whether or not she's alright. And so interestingly, the sister has more dialogue here. This is sort of an expansion on her character. He's what are you doing in the middle of nowhere? Okay, you're fine, you're not frozen to death, great, what are you doing here? And she says, this is not nowhere since we are both here. I am doing the same as you, pausing to take a rest before resuming a long journey. This seems to be an obvious reference to the fact that some of Ozpin's life, you know, was basically resting before the fact that he had the courage to sort of go and stand up against Salem and fight against Salem. He lived a lot of lives being drunk and avoiding things, and this is the turning point life. And in the world of Remnant, she simply says that she's waiting for her sisters, and the wizard calls her a fool, which is again like very like crabby old man in this version. But in the fairy tale version, it's much more like nice. Like he's much nicer to her. He invites her inside and cooks for her. He asks her where she came from, and she says, "Where we came from is not as important as where we are going." And then he's like, "Do you know me? Like, what do you know of my journey?" And he's like, "I do not know you, sir, but life is a journey for all of us with a beginning, middle, and end. You seem quite wise for your years." And then she's like, "Yeah, meditation helps me clear my mind and improves my focus, you know, when I begin to lose my way." And she's like, "Hey, let's do some guided meditation." And he's just like, "Sure." So instead of reluctantly joining her like he does in the World of Remnant, he sort of begrudgingly is like, "Ah, fine, I'll sit under the tree with you." Like he's actually much more kind here, where he like actually engages. That he achieved the serenity and clarity that had eluded him. Then spring comes singing outside of his house. So in the fairy tale, she is already planting the seeds, apparently. Like he just looks outside and she's doing the planting and whatever, right? But in the World of Remnant, she actually like plants them to repay him for his like reluctant hospitality and stuff. So again, there's two different things going on. Like, you know, the spring character doing it in return for his hospitality, but then the spring character just doing it to do it, right? And so those are kind of different. And she tells him that it's important to stop and smell the roses, and then a rosebud sprouts at her feet and all that stuff, and the wizard's like, "How do you do that?" And she says that she's good at making things grow, and that, you know, she is relaxing, she's trying to rest on a long journey, but, you know, it is relaxing for her, it is resting, her just being able to grow what she wants, I guess. And she also says hard work can be its own reward, referring to the fact that even though she says she's resting, you know, she's still doing stuff. And spring shows him how, and they tend to the garden every day. And so in the World of Remnant, he never steps outside until summer comes, but with this, it's like, okay, he's actually out tending the garden with her every single day. So again, lots of big changes going on there. In the World of Remnant, when summer arrives and is like laughing, she laughs at the fact that he chooses to stay indoors and views the world out of a small window. And this is the first time he leaves his home in the World of Remnant. However, in the fairy tale, right, he's already been planting flowers and being outside, so this part needed to be changed, obviously. So this is the dialogue here. He's like, "I'll have you know I am a skilled wizard. No one has laughed at me in my life. Perhaps not to your face," she replied, "or perhaps because no one was here to see the folly in a great man who can do so much, yet does nothing." So again, this is a reference to Ozpin having all this magic and this power, but not doing anything to stop Salem yet, right? And he's like, "Yeah, your ridicule's justified." So obviously that's a big change compared to the World of Remnant. And so instead of not him going outside for the first time and all that stuff, Summer basically is laughing at him because he's like, you know, this great and powerful wizard, but he's not doing shit. You know, he's just like moping in this life, basically. Summer teaches him not to imprison himself and sort of relish in the strong connections that he's made, and they go on like walks and stuff. So then the Fall Maiden comes in, and it's interesting because in the World of Remnant, they're having a feast, which is a little random, whereas in the fairy tale, they're just like having a day, right? Because in the World of Remnant, like everything just sort of happens really quickly, whereas in the fairy tale, it actually says like, yes, we've been planting flowers for months, we've been doing this for months, like it's actually happening over the course of a year and all that stuff. The old hermit dialogue are the same though, like I have no one to love and nothing to my name and all that stuff, and that was actually in the World of Remnant, right? So that could have been an early hint about Ozpin. He not only lost his like status as a king or whatever, a god and a castle and all that stuff, but more importantly, he lost the love that he had in his life, which was Salem and then their daughters, right? And the Fall Maiden is like, hey, like you have so much already in the World of Remnant. But in the fairy tale, it says that the sisters restored all he had lost and they stayed together for more months until it was time for them to keep going. And so that's like interesting as well, is that the maidens sort of restore things in him, if that makes sense. Whereas, you know, in the World of Remnant, it's like, but you already have so much, which I guess those are both sort of saying the same thing, but instead of invalidating his pain by saying, oh, well, you know, you have so much though, why are you crying over your dead children? It's like, instead, right, it's saying that they are restoring him, you know, from his grief and all that, and I like that better. They stay for a couple more months, but then it's time to go, and Winter says that their paths lead them in different directions all over Remnant, but they are grateful to him for giving them hospitality and a break. And in the world of Remnant and the fairy tale, there is a section of like, why me dialogue, I guess, of like, you know, why did you pick me and all that stuff. And, you know, they're like, sir, like, no offense, but we didn't pick you. We just help everyone because we are able. And in the world of Remnant, Ozpin just gives them the magic, right? Ozpin's just like, yeah, like, sure, like, here you go, all that stuff. But like, in the fairy tale, he actually asks them permission first. And so this is different because instead of giving them the burden of this magic and the burden of a fate of a maiden, you could say, right, they willingly sort of accept it after discussing it. And so like, consent is important, right? Like, the whole thing about Ozpin is people are like, he never gave Pyrrha a choice, he never told anyone the truth, like, which is true, like, you know, that he actually offers it to them. He's like, hey, do you guys want magic? You know what I mean? Like, do you guys want this? And the girls are like, like, we don't know, like, let's discuss it first, let's talk about it. And then they are like, yeah, we accept. And so again, I really sort of like that. I like how it's different than sort of like Ozpin, who never gives anyone a choice. It's Ozpin who, like, you know, respects the girls and like makes sure that they consent to the magical offering. So the ending is also different, and so not included in the world of Remnant is the sisters asking what he will do. And again, I can say that that's probably so they didn't spoil things and all that stuff. And so he says that his rest is over and it's time for him to resume his journey and his work, which is obviously like all the Salem stuff, right? And also uniting the world, right? He doesn't necessarily need to fight against Salem. All the gods told him was, hey, like, make sure that Remnant's united. Sort of. Like, that's basically what the gods said anyway. What's interesting here is that they all promised to visit their dear friend. And I think that's interesting just because even though the maidens from this story are obviously dead, the maidens have sort of like stayed in Ozpin's inner circle, right? And so they always come back into Ozpin's presence eventually. And I thought that was kind of interesting. Like, oh yeah, we'll always visit you and, you know, we'll always check up on each other and all that stuff. And like, that's basically sort of what happens, like with Freya being under Ironwood's care and then like Amber to some extent and all that. Like, the maidens always come back to Ozpin no matter where they are in the world, or come around Ozpin anyway. There's something in Ozpin's notes which is kind of interesting, because I said this in the context of some of the other fairy tales, so to see that Ozpin is also saying this, I don't know, it just validates me a little bit. So he says, over the course of humanity, things that we cannot traditionally understand have been attributed to magic, right? And so we've heard that, right? I've said that. I've said that when it comes to like the Faunus and all that stuff, and you know, like Poseidon and whatever. Like, when it comes to other myths, it's like, oh, you can't explain, you know, a tsunami. You make Poseidon, you make an angry god that's causing the tsunami, and if you, you know, please him, it can all stop and all that stuff. Like, I've said that when it comes to the other fairy tales, especially, I think I said that mostly like in the Faunus fairy tale, like when people can't explain sort of science and natural evolution, they sort of bring that, they bring the gods into it and all that stuff. And so it's funny, like, it's ironic that Ozpin is saying it in this one, because this is the one that's actually true. Like, he's doing this to almost cover his ass for the maidens, so people don't think that the maidens are real. And again, like, I've said this in my other analysis videos, like, oh, you can't understand, like, the storminess of the sky, you make Zeus, and, like, Zeus is angry tonight, and all that sort of stuff like that, right? And so Ozpin saying this is very ironic, because there is magic, right? And so I just found that really funny. That's something that I've been saying as a real-life thing to apply to some of the other fairy tales. Ozpin actually acknowledges. He just acknowledges on the one fairy tale that happens to be true, which is kind of funny. And then he says he fears that if unrestricted magic were possible, the results would be chaotic and catastrophic. And like, yeah, they were kind of in the old world, right? Like, if you think about it pre-snap, right? Salem using the magic against the gods with all those other humans, not great, right? And so that's like another purposefully ironic line. Like, if such magic exists, right? Like, it did exist and it did cause chaos, right? It did cause catastrophe and all that stuff. And then Ozpin says, better to leave such fanciful notions comfortably in the realm of fantasy. And again, another added chuckle for the fact that the audience knows, like, yes, the maidens and the magic are real. So the fact that Ozpin is saying, like, better leave such, like, fanciful imaginary notions in the comfort of, like, fantasy and just stories and all that, like, Ozpin. I really like the ending too, because it drives home the fact that the magic wasn't the powers. You know what I mean? Like, the magic wasn't the powers they got from Ozpin, but in who they were and what they taught him. Like, the meditating and, you know, just like enjoying life and stuff, appreciating what you have. Like, all of those lessons that the girls in the story taught him, that was their magic, that was their power, not the magic that they got at the very end. And that's something that's sort of missing from the world of Remnant a little bit. Like, obviously it's there, but in this one it's like much more drived home, if that makes sense. Drove. I actually prefer this fairy tale to the one that we got in the world of Remnant, just because it does expand on Ozpin a lot more, and we see how his hermit life was really that transitionary life, if that makes sense, that he stopped moping, right? He stopped body snatching this old man and making him live in solitude, right? And he actually, like, made an effort to try and unify humanity, do the fight against Salem, live with his lives and all that stuff. Because think about that poor old man that he went into, right? Like, that old man, like, he had no choice, but he isolated him from the rest of the world and all that stuff. But yeah, Ozpin stopped moping, all that sort of stuff, and that was that on that. And so yeah, I hope that you guys enjoyed this video, and I will see you guys next time. Bye, guys!